Welcome to Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
I'm your host, Madeline.
And I'm your co-host, David.
I feel like we haven't recorded in forever.
It's been a couple of weeks. You've been in New York. I have been sick in bed or on my couch. Like, I have been a fountain of snot for the last week.
I didn't know you were a poet. Wow.
My beautiful words. I just sprayed an insane amount of nasal spray at my nose so that I don't sound totally weird for this whole recording.
You sound good. You sound real, not weird.
I have learned through listening back to our episodes to hear what was going on with the audio that I have the weirdest possible vocal affect imaginable. I don't know what it is. I don't know.
That's accurate. I think the recording issue is a thing, but I know we're correcting it because someone recently said, "Why does Madeline always sound so quiet?" And I'm like, okay, so now we've overcorrected.
It's just because I am a man talking over you. That's why.
I'm going to tell people that. I'm like, oh, well, that's because David's a misogynist. He actually turns down my microphone volume on every recording to minimize me.
Yeah, a friend of ours had a band back in Fresno. Oh God, what were they called? I think they were called the Panda Bear. And I remember talking to one of his, like, he played guitar in this band. And I remember talking to the singer and she was like, yeah, we can't get a demo recorded because every fucking time hi Matt, if you're listening, it turns down everything but his guitar on the recording.
Wow. What a move. What a power move that is.
I mean, Matt is a very talented guitarist. I don't think he's that talented. He is not a talented recording engineer.
It kind of is the same vibe though as like one of the Gallaghers. Like he should be like the third Gallagher from Oasis, that kind of energy.
He doesn't not, especially when he was younger, he doesn't not look like a lost Gallagher.
Right? He could be a lost Gallagher. Okay, well, before we get into the episode, we have a little bit of housekeeping. So the housekeeping is, as always, check out our Patreon. If you're not over there, it's only $3 a month, and we record around 2 bonus episodes a month, and we have been doing them as kind of asides to whatever our main episode is. So this week's episode is going to be about the West Virginia coal mining wars, and the aside we're doing over on Patreon for this week is about Samuel Gompers, who's a guy who led a pretty successful American labor movement, but like on the back of a lot of racism and misogyny. So interesting character.
Yeah.
We talk about him over on the Patreon if you're interested. And if you have like a relative who's like a conservative white man who's really into labor unions, but otherwise is extremely conservative and you don't know how to position him in your mind, this will be illuminating for you.
And it might also give you some ways to talk to him about this in a way that is constructive. And I think that like that episode goes really far afield in some ways that I think are pretty productive. Would you say?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of good dialogue going on about labor and the American left and what happens when you exclude people of color or women from your movements and the importance of short-term gains versus long-term gains, etc. So that's the kind of stuff we got on over on our Patreon, $1.50 per bonus episode. I think the price is pretty good. It's patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. The other kind of housekeeping thing I have is the book. So the book is still up for sale. I Survived Capitalism and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. I just got somebody today in my comment section said it changed their life. So
it is a life change. I have heard back from your book is making the rounds of my old apartment complex. Like people are passing it along when they're done with it and they all love it.
Oh, great. Oh, I love that. So the interesting thing that's going on with the book right now is that the editor thinks we might want to do a second book tour leading up to like graduation, because it's a good graduation giftable for people graduating college, graduating high school, trying to make sense of their relationship with money. So if you are interested in me potentially coming to a town near you that I did not go to on the first book tour, we're talking East Coast tour dates. We're talking some Midwest tour dates that don't include Chicago, things like that. Definitely go over onto my TikTok. There's a video where I'm asking for feedback, and it'll be one of the more recent videos. Maybe I'll pin it to the top of the page and let me know your city and where you would love to see me, because the first book tour was really fun and a lot of people came out. And I think we had a really good time. And in Portland, a lot of people asked me questions about the CIA, and that made my day. So it was fun. If you want to participate, go over on my TikTok. It's Madeline_Pendleton. And I'll go ahead and pin that video to the top of the page so you don't have to look too far for it, and give me your vote on where we should go. Do you have anything else?
Wait, Madeline, I actually have a question.
What is it?
Giftable?
Giftable. Yeah.
What is it? Is that a Madeline original coinage?
Oh, this is something in retail we talk about, a giftable. It's something that you sell knowing people can buy it to give to somebody else, a giftable.
The word gift didn't already work there?
Well, because it's not necessarily a gift. It's a giftable. It's able to be gifted, but it hasn't become the gift yet.
Aren't most retail objects? I have been the proud recipient from your boyfriend of socks recently. And that was
giftable. Socks are a giftable. How many parents buy their kids socks for the holidays as stocking stuffers? That's a classic giftable.
They're stocking a stuffing and a stocking.
Yeah, it's like one step short of the Mitch Hedberg joke that says that a severed foot is the ultimate stocking stuffer. An empty sock is the ultimate stocking stuffer.
All right. So that was my question. I learned something new today. In all my years of working retail, never heard that term. And
did you work retail?
You don't remember my horrible season, for example, working the Barnes & Noble? I worked Barnes & Noble during the holiday season when I think we were 17.
God, I don't remember that. Wow.
It was one of the managers at the Fresno Barnes & Noble, because I worked through the holiday season into like the return season directly after Christmas, where everyone just returns everything for store credit because they don't want whatever damn book you bought them.
The giftables. Yeah, they're returning all the giftables.
But you had to get a manager to do all of the returns for you. And there was a button under the like cash register to like call a manager. And obviously, like, if you're a rational person in January, you just keep a manager at the registers because there are going to be a lot of returns. They were not thinking that way. And so I was pressing the button every 2 minutes or whatever, being like, there's a return, there's a return. They just want the cash. They just want the cash. And the manager got so pissed that he shoved me out of the way, and in a very characteristically me move, I had been stacking the return books at my feet. And so I did a very Buster Keaton-esque trip and like somersault fall into another checkout person at the register.
Wow. I know. You know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing class action lawsuit. There's two of you. There's got to be more. You fell. You were physically assaulted on the job, and you fell into another employee. That's two people. I think we can get more. I think, you know what? If you have been physically assaulted by a Barnes & Noble manager, contact David. I think
I think that was 20 years ago.
I think there's no statute of limitations on getting assaulted by your manager at a Barnes & Noble. I don't think there's a law about that yet.
Fair enough. Well, I look forward to the emails. You mentioned what we're talking about today, and we are talking about the West Virginia coal mining wars, and specifically the wars of 1920 to 1921. sometimes called the Battle of Blair Mountain. And this was a listener request over on Patreon. So this is
that's
the other
another selling point for the Patreon. You get to give us your requests for episodes, and we listen to them, and we do them a lot.
We will do your bidding.
We will do your bidding, as long as your bidding seems cool, man.
Yeah, and this one seemed cool. So I wanted to kind of start a little later in the story. On August 1st, 1921, I put 2021, Ed Chambers and Sid Hatfield, the former sheriff of Mingo County, West Virginia, arrived in Welsh, West Virginia to answer charges of conspiracy relating to shootings at the Mohawk coal mining camp. As the two men mounted the steps of the McDowell County Courthouse, gunmen of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, led by one Charles Lively and hired by the West Virginia coal operators to protect their mining interests, opened fire from the top of the steps, killing Hatfield instantly.
Whoa.
Ed Chambers was shot several more times, and as he fell, his wife Sally attempting to shield his body and shouting, "Don't shoot him anymore," Lively rushed towards him and fired a shot point blank into his temple, killing him.
Okay, wait, I have so many questions already. Why was this dude's wife there?
Well, so both of their wives, so Jessie and Sally, Jessie was Sid Hatfield's wife, and Sally was Ed Chambers' wife. They were there because their husbands were being arraigned on these charges of conspiracy related to this thing in Mohawk. So they were just there with their husbands, getting, going to be arraigned.
Wow.
The Baldwin Felt detectives were never charged with Hatfield and Chambers' deaths, claiming self-defense, though both men were somewhat famously unarmed. How the two men, Hatfield and Chambers, came to be targets of the Baldwin Felts Agency and the subsequent reaction of West Virginia coal miners is one of the most dramatic and also one of the bloodiest and undertold episodes in the history of American labor. So, Maddie, what do you know about the West Virginia coal miners' strike?
Well, I know two dudes were shot by the police and some hired guns because their bosses were mad at them. That's what I know. I know everything you just told me about 5 minutes ago and not much beyond that. But that is pretty harrowing. I always think dying at work would be the worst thing in the world, right? Because you're like, I didn't even want to fucking be here and now I got to die here. But I think getting killed by people your boss hired at your work site, I think that's even worse.
While you're going to be charged for crimes committed against your boss, allegedly, and we'll talk about this. And we've got a lot more to say about Charles Lively, the guy who shot Ed Chambers point blank.
I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I don't think your boss should get to kill you. Call me batty. I don't think your boss should be allowed to kill you or hire someone to kill you. I don't think that's my very strong, extreme political stance. I don't think your boss should be able to hire someone to kill you.
That, you could run for president on that platform.
That's the platform. That's what I got going on. That is shocking and harrowing, and I am not a fan. So I'm kind of surprised, actually, that I had never heard of these, it's riots, right? Or is it not riots?
It was a full battle. And as we get into it, you'll see it was a straight up battle. People on both sides, remember this is 1921, so this is directly or just a few years after World War I. So many of the people on both sides were actually veterans and had a lot of military training, and they acted like it. And the first thing to bear in mind is that coal was, throughout the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution. Not only did it provide power, of course, for trains and for factories, but it was necessary for the production of iron and steel as well. West Virginia, and specifically the geographically isolated regions on the southwestern border of the state, contained some of the richest deposits of coal. Up until the beginning of the 20th century, that land was really inaccessible, and so it was mostly farmland. Because of the geographic isolation, the region's coal fields were relatively inaccessible, but after 1910, coal as a portion of the U.S. energy supply began to lose ground to natural gas, oil, and hydroelectric power. As Lon Savage observes, after 1910, coal was really only profitable during times of extreme economic boom and growth. And one such driver of economic growth is war. So World War I drove a huge spike in demand for coal, which saw efforts to increase both wages and working hours for coal miners. And a distinction also needs to be made between anthracite and bituminous coal for practical purposes. And if you're like a big coal chemistry nerd, please forgive me. I'm not. This is my dumb guy take on this. Anthracite coal is denser, burns cleaner, but is less plentiful than bituminous coal. Margaret Gadsby observes in the direct aftermath of the coal wars in West Virginia that the anthracite coal regions principally located in northeastern Pennsylvania, the coal miners, oh boy, I lost my place.
They were almost entirely unionized.
Yeah, they were almost entirely unionized. That was not the case in West Virginia. There, the rule was non-union labor and so-called yellow dog contracts, which a yellow dog contract is just a contract that makes you not able to join a union and forbids membership in a union.
So
the transformation, yeah, and so that was like the norm in southwestern West Virginia, encompassing Minko, Logan, McDowell, and Boone counties. And their development into coal mines had been a relatively recent phenomenon, often spurred by Eastern development from Pennsylvania. In fact, the Pennsylvania Rail Company, the one previously run by Tom Scott, that richest guy in the country that we learned about in 1877, had huge interest suddenly in West Virginia. As the demand for coal increased, investment in the region, the population soared. Between 1890 and 1920, West Virginia's population saw an increase of 4 times, and in Logan, McDowell, and Mingo counties, that increase was even higher.
So we have a coal boom. We've got a coal boom.
We have a coal
basically. Boom. Okay.
And so we have all these like small farmers who are either being pushed out, becoming sort of small business, like petty bourgeois types, or going into the coal mines themselves. In addition, you have waves of Welsh, Irish, Slavic, and Black workers immigrating into the area to work in the mines. And the older, more established, wealthier population profited off the new mines as like small business owners, right? Like they could, run a store or run a hotel or whatever.
Right. Because there's all these new people in town, so the economy's booming. So like every industry's picking up. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. 80% of the miners in West Virginia lived in company towns, paying rent to the company from whom they drew their wages and shopping in company stores. Often those yellow dog contracts included a clause where you had to shop at the company store, which is wild.
So wild. Also, isn't Amazon doing like a company store thing right now?
Are they really?
I think not. I don't know if it's a company store, but I think they're doing like an Amazon town for the warehouse workers, and you have to like live in the Amazon. I don't know. I saw some story about this. I don't know if they're going forward.
I mean, that sounds real familiar. It also sounds like neo-feudalism. So
yeah.
Our future looks bright, wonderful.
Okay, so if anybody's listening, don't live in a building owned by your employer, and don't shop at their store.
So one of the consequences of this was obviously if a mine worker died or was fired or joined a union, his family was summarily evicted from their home, usually by the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, who would just show up and throw all your shit on the street.
Wow.
In 1912, the United Mine Workers, led by John L. Lewis, began a unionizing effort in Kanawha County, West Virginia, home of the state capital, Charleston. The Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike, as it came to be known, involved around 7,500 union miners striking for recognition by the operators of 96 mines. The striking miners demanded, among other things, recognition for the local United Mine Workers chapter, the right to free speech.
Wow.
Because that was something that they really couldn't do with the yellow dog contracts. The blacklisted workers be rehired because anyone who had joined the union had obviously been fired. That workers no longer be compelled to shop at company stores And this is a big one that we'll see come up later, control of the scales and check weight stations, because miners were paid by tonnage rates, so based off of how much coal they mined. But the or the coal operators controlled the scales and would often lighten the load, so to speak, on the scales so
to
that
underpay them.
Ton
wow.
is it's funny in their demands, you see a thing where they're like, we're setting a ton at 2,000 pounds, okay, guys? Like they're literally just like, we have to define words here because
Wow.
the mine operators were so fucking shady. During the battle for recognition, representatives of the Baldwin Felts evicted Union miners from their homes and in the middle of the night sprayed a Union miners camp with machine gun fire from a train called the Bull Moose Special, killing one and injuring several others. Mother Jones, more on her later, led a march of pro-union women through the valley around Kanawha County carrying umbrellas. Because of her pro-union activism, she was placed under house arrest, which was only lifted when someone smuggled out a message to a pro-union senator in Indiana. So,
that's very far from West Virginia.
Not very. It's in the neighborhood. So she had been under house arrest for 85 days. The Paint Creek, Cabin Creek strikes led to the death of 50 miners, not including those that died from malnutrition.
Okay, so I just want to recap what basically happened here. So we have a coal boom. We have a bunch of new industry popping up in these towns in West Virginia, especially, where there's new mines opening up, a bunch of new businesses opening up to accommodate the new miners. New miners are moving to town looking for work. And the miners in some areas are unionized and they're being treated a little better. But in the areas we're looking at, they are not unionized and they are getting treated really, really, really terribly. So this guy, John L. Lewis, is then the person who tries to unionize the United Mine Workers. That's what they're trying to do in 1912. And in this effort, they go on strike. And this strike's really big. It's 7,500 union miners who are striking for recognition, like, hey, we joined a union. You need to recognize it, to the guys who own the mines that they're working at, 96 different mines. And they're like, not only do you need to recognize that we are unionizing, we are becoming a union, you also need to let us have our free speech as constitutionally guaranteed. You need to rehire anybody who was fired for being in a union before. And you need to make it so we don't have to shop at these company stores, which are really exploitative and weird. And you need to make sure that we know what's going on when you pay us, because you pay us by how much coal we find. And you guys are telling us numbers that don't make sense. And you guys are being sketchy and shady to try to underpay us. And we need union reps there to make sure that this is all going smoothly. So this is what has kind of happened up until this point. And while this is going on, their bosses, it's not like the bosses are like, okay, we see your might. They're like, no. So they start fighting back is what happens, right?
Yeah. And they're kicking people out of their houses. They're kicking whole families out.
So, okay. So when they come to them and they're like, we're striking, here are our demands, their bosses are like, fuck you, basically, we're going to go harder. So they're like, you know what? You all leave. Get out of the houses that we own that you've been living on. Shut it down. And also, this is the thing that's wild to me. They sprayed a Union miners camp with machine gun fire from a train. They literally got on a train with machine guns and were just like, and we're fucking shooting you all.
Which, what happens in West Virginia, when we were talking about the 1877, trainman strike, you were like, these people burn down trains, right? And everything was really intense. The West Virginia coal miner stuff makes the 1877 stuff look like child's play. From the beginning, the Baldwin Felts people were just like, we don't give a shit. We're going to fucking kill you.
Wow.
That was the thing.
And someone did die. You said somebody died and a bunch of people were injured when this happened.
Yeah.
So you have to really imagine, for this needs to carry a lot of weight in your mind. Imagine you unionize, say you work at Starbucks and you unionize your Starbucks and you go to Starbucks and you're like, you have to recognize we're union now. And Starbucks not only says no, but they shoot at you with a machine gun. This is so wild. And I think we really don't have a good appreciation for how much like striking and organized labor movements have gotten us. Like this was 100 years ago, this would have been normal. That like if you had a grievance with your boss, they might just shoot you. And this is like this is like the importance of labor organizing, right? Like we are now at a place where this would not probably happen, although there are still privatized police forces that protect capital. So ideally not. I mean, David, you did say you got shoved by your manager at a Barnes and Noble. So
and it should be mentioned like go ahead.
No, this is just like really, really intense. And I think something we really need to like process that, yeah, like 2 generations before us, or if your family lives a long time, 1 generation before you, potentially, this was happening at people's workplaces. So, okay, so then we've got this Mother Jones, who we're going to talk about later, who I have a lot of questions about. She organizes all the women and she's like, no, we're fighting back against these bosses. And she does all this pro-union activism. And then, yeah, she gets illegally placed under house arrest. And that's why all the union workers have to smuggle the message to a guy in Indiana. And I know we were joking about like Indiana being far. It's like 2 states away. It's not even like just next door. It's like you gotta go through Ohio to get to Indiana. Like it is not super close. And after 85 days of her being on house arrest illegally, finally she's released. So, and then you're saying after this kind of skirmish that happens here, 50 miners in total are killed by their bosses, like through direct action.
Yeah, like
wild. Can you imagine?
That's right.
50 baristas at Starbucks were shot by their boss?
That's not including in the death toll those of the miners and the miners' families who died of malnutrition. And there are just like very vague estimates, but it's a lot. Like it's like
because they weren't working, so they didn't have any income. And
this was
lasting months,
like this happened
ostensibly
through the winter. The Baldwin Felts Agency was also responsible for massacres. Like they were basically, if you were a coal miner or a coal mine operator, you knew about the Baldwin Felts people. If you were an operator, you worked with them. If you were a coal miner, you knew about them. They committed a massacre in Ludlow, Colorado around the same time, in which they dropped bombs down a well, killing a family of miners at the bottom of the well.
Oh my God.
It's crazy shit. At the end of this, Kanawha County, which is not what we'll be talking about in the 1920s, but Kanawha County, which was the seat of Charleston, the capital, did end up increasing union recognition. And I think it's worth talking about John L. Lewis himself because he represents, kind of like Samuel Gompers, who we talk about over on the Patreon, a lot of the contradictions of unionism and the American labor movement as a whole. Early in his career, for example, he opposed union efforts to establish unemployment benefits on the grounds that it would encourage idleness. So he's got this like real like individualist streak. At some point, he said, whenever I wanted work, I could find it, right? Under his direction, the United Mine Workers began a long association with Samuel Gompers and the AFL. So there's this like conservative business unionism that exerted really tight control and limited local autonomy and minimized rank and file participation in favor of like business unionism and like centralized direction, which was, I think, in some ways undeniably effective, but it took a lot of the militancy and activism out of the labor movement.
And we talked about business unionism over on the Patreon, but just to clarify, that would be somebody who is representing the interests of unionizing, right? But doing it with their bosses in a way where they're like more like, we're on the same side. We're trying to accomplish the same things. We support business. We love capitalism. You just have to pay us better so we can capitalism better for you, bro. Like this is not like a radical ideology. This is like a very like skilled workers, quote unquote skilled workers, right? We all know that that's a loaded term, but skilled workers and their employers coming together to do more capitalism. So this is kind of the ideology of the unionism going on with Samuel Gompers, certainly. And kind of, it sounds like, with this guy, Lewis, who was the one who was organizing these miners. So he was even that radical, and they're still like, no, comma, and we're going to kill you with machine guns.
that's kind of the vibe, right? So like a way of thinking about business unionism, like Samuel Gompers said that the unions would do business with business, and that's how they would get things done. And so that's like a catchy way of thinking about it. He was really tireless in organizing, though. So Lewis was so good at organizing. And as the mine operators themselves and acknowledging in it, as the mine operators themselves acknowledged in negotiations held with the United Mine Workers in 1922, wages in the unionized coal fields of the Central Competitive Zone, which encompassed like parts of Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio, were 56% higher than in non-union fields.
So we know that unionization is obviously working. All data shows that people in unions earn more money, and 56% more for being a union worker. That's not insignificant. That is a lot of money. I think so. At work, I earn $73,000 a year. So 56% more of that would be like me earning over $100,000 a year. That's a huge, like, think about your salary and add 50% to it. That is massive. That's significant. So, you know, we're going to talk about, we talked about Gompers over on the bonus episode, and he relates to the Lewis mentality. It sounds like a lot, right?
Yeah. And so basically, it like by the 1920s, the situation is kind of this. During the war, there had been an increase in demand for coal that had increased investment in coal mines. As the war ended between 1918 and 1921, the number of working days in West Virginia mines decreased from 249 to 142 because there's decreased demand, and coal is losing market share to natural gas and oil and hydroelectric power. At the same time, in southern West Virginia, with the exception of the mines in Kanawha, unionized in 1912 and 1913, the mines were entirely non-union. So right as the United Mine Workers of America are involved in this giant strike that encompasses the central competitive field in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, there are these extraordinarily productive non-union mines in southwestern West Virginia that are kind of fucking up their strike drive. And miners at the same time are still living in company houses and compelled to shop at company stores. Carl Sandburg described the situation of the mining camps in his poem Company Towns. Quote, "You live in a company house, you go to a company school, you work for this company according to the company rules. You all drink company water and all use company lights. The company preacher teaches us what the company thinks is right." So this kind of brings us to 1920. John Lewis had been organizing this massive drive through southwestern Virginia in order to get these shops unionized so that like the power of the national coal miners strike would be more effective, because right, if you have these non-union members still producing while the national union is on strike, it lessens the effectiveness of the strike.
They effectively become scabs whether they want to or not, the non-union workers.
Yeah. So unionization attempts begin first at Burnwell before spreading all across all of Mingo County. At Red Jacket, 500 miners were fired for joining a union. Mother Jones, then 90 years old, comes back to West Virginia, and she tells miners that the mine operators wouldn't keep their dogs where they keep you fellows. She laid out the stakes of the organizing drive thus, quote, "It is freedom or death, and your children will be free. We are not going to leave a slave class. And I want to say to you, the next generation will not charge us for what we have done. They will charge us for what we have left undone."
Wow.
At this point, thousands of miners in Mingo County struck for union recognition and began a march on Matawan.
Wow.
On the other side, Al Felts of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency declared that he would break the organizing drive if it put 100 men in jail and cost $1 million. And it did so much worse than that by the end of his
I mean, I think this is what we're talking about too. This like the cop mindset, right? Where it's like, did you see recently, David, that thing that went viral that's helicopter footage of a police department, a local police department, hunting a guy accused of shoplifting with a helicopter?
What?
Yeah, and
No.
everyone's just like, doesn't this seem like overkill to you guys? Why are you guys posting this on your local police like department Twitter? Like this is something to be proud of. Like, do you see how ridiculous it is to go after a shoplifter who probably took something worth $20 with a helicopter? Like, what is the resource allocation here? And this just speaks to, I think, this idea where they like get so self-righteous, the cops, where they're like, I don't care if it costs $1 million and 100 men go to jail. I'm going to break up this union strike. And you're like, at what point does this stop being cost effective even in your guys' head? And I think the answer is it never does. There's so much moral like self-righteousness wrapped up in it. They really want to pretend like they're the good guys playing, you know, cops and robbers or whatever. And it's really, really wild to see like the egregious, like the comfort with such like an egregious cost associated with stopping these strikers.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing to point out is that like, right, the material conditions of the investment in West Virginia mining were already becoming extraneous, right? Because it's like they invested all of this capital into these mines right at a time when hydroelectric power, natural gas, and oil were taking over the market share for or like energy supply in the United States, which is like the thing that Marx talks about so much, is that like investment always leads to these crises of overproduction, where it's like, oh, like there's the technological change, and now we have all of this investment, and the only way to get our money's worth from this investment is to squeeze workers into the fucking ground.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
because
that's
you're overproducing shit people don't need. Yeah. And you have to get your cost of goods down as low as possible to try to convince people to buy this shit they don't need.
So this brings us to May 19th of 1920. The United Mine Workers had been carrying out an organizing drive in Matawan and the surrounding Mingo County. At the same time, 13 representatives of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, hired by the Stone Mountain Coal Company, arrived in town to evict striking miners from company houses.
And this is
First,
because,
they decamped to the Uriah.
Wait, sorry, just to clarify, this is because if you are striking, you are no longer employed by them and you are living in a company house. So now that you're not an employee, you're homeless, right?
Yeah, and all of these people have families, right? So it's not just like right, like it's not just a bunch of like miners, but it's also their like wives and children.
Right. Okay, got it.
All getting evicted.
Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. So first, the Baldwin Felts agents like went to the Uriah's Hotel, which was owned by Anne's Hatfield. And I'm just gonna say this: there are like 5 Hatfields in this story.
Okay.
So,
Unrelated.
This is not Sid Hatfield. They were sort of related, but that was in dispute because some people thought that Sid Hatfield was an illegitimate child. But that's neither here nor there.
Okay.
Yeah, this whole thing. So Anne's Hatfield, though, was an ally of the mining companies because he owned a hotel in town and was kind of a part of the petit bourgeois and kind of liked the mining companies. So from there, the detectives loaded into cars, armed with rifles, and headed towards the company house where striking miners' families still lived. As the detectives' arrival spread among striking miners, the Matawan sheriff, Sid Hatfield, and Mayor Cabell Testerman were notified, and both women were markedly pro-union. Sid was born in 1893 across the Tug River in Kentucky. His family, the Hatfields, were the Hatfields of the Hatfield-McCoy fame, and a prominent family in West Virginia. Basically, Madeline, do you know anything about the Hatfield-McCoy thing?
No, I do feel like I've heard that name before, though, but I don't think I can place it in my head right now.
Right. I feel like maybe this is because I have family from the South and that general area or something, but I heard a lot they're fighting like Hatfields and McCoys growing up.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
And basically the Hatfield-McCoy thing is this like multi-generational feud that started over apparently a returning Confederate soldier who was a Hatfield, who was alleged to have been shot by a McCoy, though it turns out later the McCoy was sick in bed. But it sparked this like decades-long feud in which like the Hatfields, who were more prominent and numerous, and the McCoys would just like take shots at each other, and it gained national prominence in the newspapers.
Yes, I totally do remember hearing about this.
Sid had started out as a miner before being promoted to blacksmith and finally becoming a coal car operator for the Auburn mine in Mattawan. His nickname was Smiling Sid, apparently because of the gold caps on his teeth. And after he was kind of like he was like a rough character. After he became famous, he told a reporter that he once, quote, had a shooting match with a man named Wilson and then didn't say anything else. And the reporter just had to track down the fact that it seems like Sid was referring obliquely to maybe having killed a mining foreman earlier in his career.
Wow.
When he was appointed by Cabell Testerman as sheriff, people were really confused, but both he and Testerman were staunchly pro-United Mine Workers, and Sid refused to arrest miners on behalf of the operators, and in one instance, beat up and arrested a representative of the Baldwin Felts Agency for illegally carrying a gun in town.
So this is the guy... Yeah, in our bonus episode, you said this might be the only good cop, and it's this guy. It's Sid Hatfield. He's not a traditional cop. He's okay. I get where you're coming from.
The stories about him that you read are often things like, oh yeah, sometimes the miners would get rowdy and fight and get drunk and stuff, and he would just be like, like you guys need to like break it up. Like he seems like a real chill guy,
like a diplomat.
Yeah, who was like very also like anti-Baldwin Felts. Like he was like, fuck these guys, they're hired guns, keep them out of here.
He's like the guy in Roadhouse, the main character in Roadhouse.
Yeah.
Yes.
But real.
And
there are we'll hear some questionable things about Sid in a moment, but
okay.
I think it's also okay. In spite of this, in spite of both he and Testerman's like pro-union stance, the Baldwin Felts each offered substantial bribes, $500 a month, to let them set up machine guns in Mattawan to disturb striking miners. Both men refused.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. At the same time, we also need to talk a little bit about the governor of the state, who was soon to be not the governor of the state, but his name was John Cornwell. And he had this, he was like a Democrat who had this very dubious relationship with labor. At one point, he told the United Mine Workers, boys, throw your support behind me and I will do everything in my power to remove the gunmen, meaning the Baldwin Felts guys, from the state. However, as the organizing and strikes of 1920 were underway, he told them to disperse, saying again, boys, which just feels condescending, I'm going to say, the constantly calling the guys boys. Do you know that every one of you is acting in violation of every law against bearing arms and that you're taking the law into your own hands? The miners responded by saying there is no law in West Virginia but the law of the coal operators. So as he returned to Charleston, the striking miners under the leadership of District 17 Secretary Fred Mooney and President Frank Kinney refused to disperse. Back in Charleston, Cornwell dispatched a message to President Wilson's Secretary of War, Newton Baker, requesting federal troops. Baker did as he was told, bypassing the president, in fact, and sent word to General Wood, a veteran of the Philippines and the Spanish-American War, who assembled a force of about 1,600 men to march on the striking miners.
Wow.
Kenny and Mooney, both of them veterans of the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek massacres, agreed to disperse the miners. Cornwell almost immediately, after getting a promise from Cornwell that Cornwell would investigate the corrupt practices of the mine operators, Cornwell almost immediately caved on his promise, telling the New York Times that the march was the result of some radical influence and dismissed the concerns of the miners.
Wow.
So that's kind of the situation as the Baldwin Felts detectives arrive. And just across the river, just to put more context on this, the kind of photo negative in terms of moral character of Sid Hatfield. Don Chafin was basically a paid stooge of the mine operators. When union organizers arrived in town, he would just arrest them. He also basically gave the Baldwin Felts detectives a free hand in evicting union miners. So back to May 19th, the 13 representatives arrive, and they immediately go to the company houses, where they proceed to evict the family of Charles Kelly, throwing their belongings into the road in front of their house. Sid arrives and asks to see a warrant, but Al Felts refuses to produce one, telling Sid that if they wanted to check on its authenticity, they could go back to town, which Sid does. Sid contacts the sheriff in the nearby county seat, Williamson, and the deputy there is like, "What warrant? What are you talking about? There's no warrant." The detectives have no authority to evict the families from the mining camps, and tells Sid that he has the authority to arrest the detectives themselves, and he's sending a warrant along for the detectives' arrest on the next train. Meanwhile, the detectives are continuing to evict families. Union miners, hearing the news of the eviction, including pregnant women and reportedly children forced at gunpoint from their homes, rushed to the scene with guns in hand. As the train arrived with the warrant for the Baldwin Felts detectives' arrest, Sid was waiting. Hesterman, meanwhile, asked a union miner to gather some sober-sided men to act as policemen. The Baldwin Felts men, having evicted 6 families and eaten a nice dinner back at the hotel, made their way towards the train to leave town. Sid arrived with the arrest warrant. Al Felts, meanwhile, produced what seems to have been a bogus warrant that he just made up for Sid's arrest. Hesterman was called to the scene and declared the warrant bogus. Okay, so what happens next is a matter of debate. Basically, all of the union miners, headed by Testerman and Hatfield on one side, and on the other, the 13 representatives of Baldwin Felts, headed by Al Felts. They're all standing outside of Chambers Hardware Store in Matawan. Sid with a warrant for Baldwin Felts' arrest, Al with a bogus warrant for Sid's arrest. And everyone's got guns. Someone starts the shooting, and immediately Testerman falls, and right after him, Felts falls dead.
Wow.
And immediately and so it just turns into a battle. Sid maintained later that Felts shot Testerman, and that when Sid saw this, he reacted by killing Felts. In any case, John McDowell of the Baldwin Felts shot at a union miner and then fled across the Tug River into the Kentucky hills. 2 other detectives, brothers Tim and Walter Anderson, fled into a neighboring house where they were found by union miners who promptly shot and killed both of them. Lee Felts, Al's brother, attempted to kill Ed Chambers' father, Reese. Another Baldwin Felts detective, B.O. Powell, was killed, but no one seemed to want to take credit for that one. Bob Mullins, a miner who had been fired that day, was killed. Another detective, J.W. Ferguson, wounded, fled into a neighboring house where union miners tracked him down. As he fled, he was shot 9 times and killed, and his body left in an alleyway behind the house. Lee also killed Tot Tinsley, an unarmed miner, before himself being shot and killed. In total, 2 miners and Mayor Testerman were killed, as well as 7 detectives.
This is so wild that so this private police force, basically hired by private companies, comes into town, disrespects the sheriff, kills the mayor. And then it's just how I can't even believe that this is a real situation. This is so wild.
Yeah. So the aftermath, and this is where it's a little sketchy. So in the immediate aftermath of what came to be known as the Battle of Matawan, Sid Hatfield became kind of a national and definitely a local hero. Tom Felts, the sole surviving brother of the Felts family, rushed to Matawan on the next train to Virginia, together with a posse of Baldwin Felts detectives, do vigilante justice.
Yeah, for revenge, yeah.
Meanwhile, Sid deputized 100 miners to keep order upon Tom's arrival. The only thing that stops this is that the train engineer being like, this is going to end bad, just didn't stop in Mattawan and just drove the Baldwin detectives to Williamson.
Wow. I mean, smart, I guess, if you're just like, this is not going to be good.
So the state police force in West Virginia at the time amounted to 50 men, all of whom were sent to Mattawan to disarm and disperse Sid's deputies.
Wow.
Meanwhile, because of his local selection, Sid was nominated to county constable on a Democratic ticket. And I just want to pause for a moment to think about what labor and class relationships were like that, like, Sid seems to have killed at least one guy at this point, Al Feltz, right? And involved in a battle in which 7 other of these like private cops were killed. And everyone in town is like, we should give him more power.
Yeah.
Right.
He's like the hero, though. This is like what a lot of the cops imagine they are. They're like, we're defending the community. We're protecting people. But it's like, well, you're not. But like this guy actually did this. He was like, no, I'm protecting these workers from this private police force who has no authority and is coming in here and doing this.
So in the meantime, remember Cabell Testerman, the mayor, is dead.
Yeah.
Sid and Cabell's widow, Jessie, decamped to Huntington, West Virginia to be wed immediately after. Yeah.
Wait, what? She was just like, that's hot energy. I can mourn the loss of my husband and also be with you, Sid. This is wild. So they must have been having an affair this whole time.
Well, no. So, okay. That's what Tom Feltz tried to maintain, because Tom Feltz was like, Sid was having an affair with Jessie and he killed Testerman in order to be with Jessie. Jessie maintained that Testerman had said, we all spend a lot of time together. If anything ever happens to me, I'm kind of an old guy. You should take up with Sid. So these are the stories that we've got so far.
Yeah, I kind of believe her, because I feel like during this time being a woman, you're like a commodity of men. So like your life is so much easier if you're tied to a man under the patriarchy, especially back then, when it's like, what are you going to earn your own money? Like, no, you need a dude to take care of you. So this kind of thing where it's like, take care of my wife if anything happens to me, that does kind of make sense in the context of like the patriarchal world of the 1920s.
Yeah, I'm going to say we're going to give Sid and Jessie the benefit of the doubt that everything was above board and this was not like a weird like murder plot against Cabell Testerman.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense that this would be the way he would kill his friend. It seems way too opportunistic. So that doesn't make sense to me either way.
So even though they had the marriage papers signed, they had to wait till the next day to see the judge. While they were waiting at the hotel, Tom Feltz had basically had Sid under surveillance. And so he had local police go to the hotel and arrest the couple for improper relations. The problem is they got there like half an hour after Sid and Jessie arrived at the hotel. So they're like, they had a marriage license, but they hadn't seen a judge. But they really didn't.
Nothing had happened.
Even according to like nothing had happened.
Yeah.
Right. Feltz obviously later claimed that it was in fact Sid who'd shot Testerman in order to marry his wife. However, Sid and I almost said Sid and Nancy. Sid and Jessie maintained that nothing untoward had gone on between them, and that Cabell had told Jessie that if anything should happen to him, she should feel free to marry Sid.
Right.
Through June, the miners all through Mingo and neighboring McDowell County began organizing in greater numbers. Mother Jones returned to the camps on the 21st to declare that professional murderers were hired to keep you in subjugation and that you paid for it with your wages.
Wow,
so she was
true.
Like,
there's so many Marx things in here. Like the quote earlier when they're like, the only law is the law of the coal miners. And it's like, that's like so like Marx and like, you know, they have the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. We need a dictatorship of the proletariat. Or, you know, here Mother Jones is talking about surplus value being stolen from, right?
Yeah.
Like she's talking about stolen wages from the workers. Like they're keeping this money that should have gone to you as their profit and they're using it to hire men who'll kill you. There's just like so much Marx going on here.
Yeah, it's fucking, and like Mother Jones does not always acquit herself well in this story. But like she was in general a tireless friend of the miners. Her husband had died when she was in her 50s, and she more or less dedicated the rest of her life to labor organizing. At one point, she led a children's march to Teddy Roosevelt's ranch or
Oh,
like compound, protesting child labor laws. There's one story about that also where she specifically picked really sickly looking kids to go on the march.
she's like optics. Optics are everything. Babe, you look ill. Come
Yeah.
on, let's go. You don't look great. It's really gonna freak people out. It's like sometimes you hear like former child actors talk about when they got cast as a role and as a kid and they were all excited, and as an adult they're like, I was cast as fat ugly child number 3. Like what? This is what she was doing. She's like,
I wonder about that with like extras or any character who's just cast as like ugly friend or something, where it's just like, especially
yeah.
like we live in a, like I meet actors relatively frequently, and
Oh,
like most of them are like typical hot people. But every now and again I'll meet someone who's like, yeah, I get cast a lot as like the like ugly friend. It's kind of my thing.
so wild.
Uh,
Yeah, and also the thing is like these people by like normal standards are like very conventionally attractive. Like even
yeah,
as the kids, you're like, that's like a really cute kid. That's like this kid
yeah.
compared to normal kids, you'd be like, oh, that kid's like extra cute. But no, in the movies, they're ugly fat child number 3.
So, in any case, he's getting back to minors
Yeah.
about his conceptually far from actors in Hollywood is, well, maybe not. I
Oh,
don't
Mother
know.
Jones was
Yeah,
casting. Okay, she was
yeah,
casting. She had a talent as a casting agent. She was all about optics. You know, she was a marketer at heart.
and
Yeah.
yeah. So on August 4th, striking miners in Mingo fired upon the Kentucky National Guardsmen stationed across the river. At Freeburn, the Kentucky National Guard again used machine gun fire to disperse striking miners. Deputies of the railroad company beat a black striker nearly to death and dropped him
Whoa.
out of a moving car.
Mm.
A baseball game turned into a riot. So that's the vibe
The
over
whole town
here.
is just like chaos fight mode.
Yeah. In the meantime, a grand jury indicted Sid and 17 of his fellow miners for the murder of the 7 Baldwin Felts detectives. The Baldwin Felts detectives were never charged. Like, they were never
Right,
charged with
obviously.
this,
Right.
obviously. Among them, both Ed and Reese Chambers, among the 17 fellow miners. The people of Matawan immediately took up a collection and paid each of the defendants $10,000 bail.
Whoa, that's so much money back then too.
And these are poor people.
Yeah. Wow.
These are like, this is the proletariat.
That's
On
major.
August 14th, Anse Hatfield, operator of the Urias Hotel where the Baldwin Felts detectives had congregated prior to the Battle of Matawan, was shot dead as he sat on his porch talking to a local dentist who caught a stray also but lived. A gun, and so the gun was fired from a nearby railroad. Sid and Ed, sitting on their own front porch nearby, rushed to the scene and went in search of the gunman. However, a state policeman found Fred Burgraff, one of the defendants, nearby with a rifle. Sid refused to arrest him, but the state trooper threatened to arrest both of them if Sid didn't comply.
Wow.
So this is the vibe. By the end of August, at Cornwell's request, 500 federal troops occupied Mingo County, armed with machine guns and cannons.
Oh.
Almost immediately, the soldiers began clearing the striking miners in a series of gun battles up and down the surrounding mountains. It kind of seems like Sid Hatfield planned an attack in Mohawk, which we'll get to later, in neighboring McDowell, where there were no federal troops, but deputies of the Baldwin Felts agents. Someone, keep this in mind,
Okay.
someone tips them off to Sid's involvement. And you know what? We're going to skip that part. Meanwhile, Sid, still sheriff, mind you, and under indictment with 17 other miners for the murder of the Baldwin Felts detectives, was running for constable of Mingo County. Although the state at large went for Republican Ephraim Kuntz for governor, Matawan County went for the Democratic county candidate, and Sid was elected as constable by a narrow margin and immediately named Ed Chambers, also under indictment, as his assailant.
Wow.
By September, the coal operators were smoothly... Oh, did I say assailant? Assistant. Though they were... Sorry.
No, it's okay. He's getting
By September, the coal operators... Yeah. I love the fact that, like, the whole town is like, you know who we want? The guy who killed a bunch of people and his friend. That's who we want running our jail.
I would feel
By
protected.
September, the coal operators... Yeah, they understand where their bread is buttered.
Yes.
By September, the coal operators, however, because of the federal troops, were basically running trainloads of strikebreakers into the mines under the watchful eye of state deputies. The striking miners hung banners at the train station declaring, "Be advised, there's a strike in progress." Fights would erupt between scabs and strikers, but the mines were eventually reopened. Coal production, which had dwindled to 50,000 tons in August, rose back to pre-strike levels of about 160 or 176,000 tons by the end of December. The strikers decamped from company housing to tent camps in the dead of winter, mind you, all along the Tug River.
Wow.
Sid, along with Mother Jones and John Lewis, as well as District President Kinney and several others, were named in a suit filed by the Red Jacket Coal Company, and because of this, prohibited from all contact with non-union miners being employed as scabs in Mingo County on the grounds of the yellow dog contracts signed by the thousands of miners before the organizing drive began. So basically, the company was like, you all signed this contract that you wouldn't do any union stuff, and now you're doing union stuff. So, like, A, you're fired, and B, you can't talk to anyone who works for the company now.
Mm-hmm.
The West Virginia courts used these contracts to prohibit unions from entering the premises of the mine operators, including, obviously, the company towns where the mine workers lived.
Right.
So, no contact. The Pond Creek Coal Company, meanwhile, sought and won an injunction against the unions prohibiting organizers from approaching the newly imported non-union workers at all. The UMW responded by asking, if a union can't make a simple statement that a strike exists in a field covered by an official strike order, what can it do? One rank-and-file worker responded simply, "We'll go to jail." So they were doing it anyway. They were like, fuck this is stupid. We're going to do it.
Also, it's like, under what law could that even be passed? That you're just not allowed to talk to a person? Like, how is that a law? Unless it's like you got a restraining order, but none of these people have restraining orders against each other. So it's just so wild.
It's just, it's these whole places are like these types of these intense class conflicts where you think about like the First Amendment, which was fought for under the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek stuff in 1912 and 1913, where they were like, we would like the right to free speech, right?
Right.
And it's sort of, if the company owns the town, the company makes the laws.
The bourgeois laws, yeah. The dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Yeah. And also, it's like you see the guy who owned the hotel, he got shot because that's the thing. It goes back to Marx. It's like the petite bourgeoisie always aligns themselves with the interest of capital in the end. And like, that's exactly what this guy was doing.
Yeah, and we'll hear more from him and his daughter in a little bit. On January 26th of 1921, the trial of Sid and his co-defendants for the death of Al Fels began. And at this point, it should be mentioned, this was like a media, like reporters from everywhere were just like, this is fucking crazy. Like, they, like New York Times people, like people from all the national papers, like descended upon Matawan to basically be like, this guy's a celebrity. At one point, Sid and Jesse were put in jail, like separate jails, and they called it the Hotel Matawan because the jailer took such good care of them that they brought them food and let their friends in to play card games. At First, the coal operators, though, attempted to have the trial moved out of Mingo County because sympathies were clearly on the side of the defendants, but they failed. Jury selection also proved to be a challenge. At one point, Anse Hatfield was called for jury selection, and when someone announced he's dead, 2 other men named Anse Hatfield emerged.
What?
So this is what I was saying. Like, this town is like, everyone's a Hatfield. There's a lot of Hatfields.
I didn't know Ames was such a popular name. I've never heard that name in my life.
One of the defendants, Isaac Brier, immediately turned state witness and had his charges dropped. He testified that Sid had whispered to him directly before the shooting started, "Let's kill every goddamned one of them."
Love it.
Which is...
Love it. Goes hard. Goes hard.
And that he had claimed that because Testerman wasn't in favor of violence, Sid would cut him in 2 with a bullet.
Oh, see, but now I don't believe he said the cool thing, because I don't believe he said that. So
no, yeah. I mean, and also, who's like, you know what we're going to do with this, like, we're going to premeditate the murder, and we are going to stage whisper about it.
Yeah.
That's not how murder works. I mean, I've never, well, that you know of. So Joe Jack, a guard working for the coal company, testified that he overheard Sid and Reese Chambers conferring before the battle, saying if Sid could get the detectives lined up for arrest, he would get a gun and kill half a dozen of them. Upon cross-examination, however, the defendant's attorney, Conniff, more or less showed that Jack had also claimed to know nothing right up to the point where he had been approached by the coal operators. Jack claimed that he'd been threatened by Sid if he testified by a message sent to him by Stella Scales. However, Stella Scales was called to the stand, and she was like, "I've never met Sid Hatfield and never sent such a message," and then said, "I've never met him, but I would like to," got down off of the witness stand and went up to introduce herself to Sid Hatfield.
Whoa.
His wife.
This needs to be a movie. There probably is a movie. This is so cinematic.
There is. It's called Madeline. It's directed by John Sayles.
Okay.
So now we got to talk about Charles Lively, who I didn't talk about earlier. So Charles Lively was the next guy to take the stand, and he had operated with his wife a restaurant and had arrived in Matawan right before the organizing drive had begun, and immediately joined the union and gotten in real close with Sid and everyone else in the union. And it turns out he was a Baldwin Felts spy.
Whoa! Dun dun dun! Wow!
Yeah.
Okay.
So he only revealed this on the stand, and he had no direct knowledge of this, but he said that in the aftermath of the Battle of Matawan, he had heard confessions in his restaurant from 5 of the defendants: Sid, Art Williams, Fred McGrath, the guy obviously also accused of shooting Anse Hatfield, Bill Bowman, and Reese Chambers, and claimed that Sid had shot Mayor Testerman in order to marry Jessie, saying, "I will have her if I have to wade through hell to get her." Again, this is not, I don't know how people talked in 1920.
It's sounding good. It's sounding real
That's not how people
badass.
talk.
Yeah, if a man said that, like,
I'll
wade through hell to get to you, I'd be like, I'm considering it. I'm considering it. Those are strong words. You know?
This seems, I mean, it seems like it's kind of a lie. So in his cross-examination, Conniff characterized Lively, thus, with a union card in your pocket, you were working against the union, weren't you? And then 2 telephone operators who were listening in on Sid and Testerman's call to the Williamson deputy to get the warrant for the Baldwin Felts arrest, reported that Sid had declared his intention to murder the Baldwin Feltsmen, but upon cross, both were revealed to be related either to Anse Hatfield or to one of the mine owners, and to have anti-union sympathies.
Also, why would they on the phone, when they knew people were listening, be like, "I'm gonna kill a man in a crime"? Like, what? They're literally lawmen.
Yeah.
They know how it works. This is so wild.
Yeah, so they get all of these people who, like, hear Sid and like the other, like Ed and Art and all the other guys being like, you know what we're going to do today? Crime. Which is, it's absurd, right?
Yeah.
By the end of the trial, the whole thing had sort of devolved into these rival claims to truth, and each was colored by the sympathies of the witness. Sid and Ed and the other defendants were ultimately declared not guilty for the murder only of Al Phelps. So they still had the other 6 guys to deal with.
Yeah.
They still had to wait trial for the other Baldwin Phelps men, but they arrived home in Madeline, according to the New York Times, like heroes. It took them an hour to get, like, for Sid and Jesse to get back to the company store that Jesse had inherited from Testerman, and which now Sid and Jesse would run. More on that store later. That spring, the union miner workers commissioned a silent movie, which, if you can find a copy of this movie, which is called Smile and Sid, send us a message on Patreon. I want to see it. I looked everywhere for the damn thing. The other thing about it is it showed the reality of the tent cities where the miners lived, having been thrown out of the company houses. So it had real footage of those tent cities.
Wow.
By May of 1921, federal soldiers were removed from Mingo, and the striking miners prepared an all-out assault on the mines. So again, nothing was peaceful here from the start. No, like, it wasn't like, we're going to march peacefully and wave signs. It was like, we have guns.
Yes.
That was just from the beginning. Non-union miners, meanwhile, prepared to fight back. On May 12th, the first battle began between union and non-union miners. State deputies, meanwhile, rained machine gun fire down on the union tent camps, where obviously also families were living. This is what became known as the 3-day Battle of Tug River. The newly elected mayor or governor, Morgan, remember Cornwell's out, sent word to President Harding declaring that nothing short of 100% martial law can restore order. Harding was like, I'm not getting involved. Like,
I mean,
this
smart
is
politically, yeah.
I mean, he eventually did, but he had kind of run on a like, we're gonna let the states do the states thing, and was sort of like, look, I don't want to fuck with the miners. I don't want to fuck with the unions. I also just feel like you guys haven't declared state martial law, so do your do that.
Right.
So mass meetings were held near Charleston of United Mine Workers members declaring a march on Mingo County. Captain Brockus, head of the state police force, deputized what he called the better people of Mingo, meaning mostly the middle classes.
Right. The better people. Wow.
This also echoes, remember what happened in St. Louis and Chicago in 1877, where these middle class militias were formed?
Yeah.
Right. So the middle classes, they're not peaceable NPR liberals when their backs against the wall by labor.
Yeah, I mean, but the middle class today is violent, just in different ways. We see that.
Yeah, I mean, there were those people, was it in St. Louis or Baltimore or whatever, who somewhat famously stood outside their little McMansion in polo shirts with guns during.
Yes, that happened semi-recently. Yes, yeah, totally.
Yeah. So under Brockus's order, a militia made up of physicians, clergymen, leaders of the American Legion and the YMCA formed.
Wow.
Morgan declared martial law on May 19th and issued a proclamation banning processions, parades, public assemblies, as well as prohibiting any publication, either newspaper, pamphlet, handbill, or otherwise, reflecting in any way upon the United States or the state of West Virginia.
So he's like, you can't talk about us. That's illegal.
Yeah.
Oh, this goes back to they were asking for their rights to free speech. And he's like, absolutely not. Do not speech about us.
And you're going to kind of learn in a bit, basically, this was selectively applied. So people were still going to movies. The American Legion held a march. They held a Memorial Day parade. Things were sort of going on. But if you were a United Mine worker, even just going to a meeting, you're out of there, you're in jail.
Wow.
So Major Thomas Davis was appointed militia commander and dispatched to Williamson. By June 1st, the militia had 800 volunteers who exercised their powers really selectively.
Wow.
Again, by like when one striker was arrested for carrying a gun, even though he had a permit, miners gathered outside the jail to protest and were themselves arrested. Davis overflowed.
Wait. Just a second. I also just want to take a second to really contextualize this. Like, you're in your town doing your constitutionally guaranteed rights, right? And
yeah,
you've just decided that your neighbors with more money than you all have the right to just carry guns and arrest you if they want.
Yeah, that's the vibe.
That is so wild. You're like, my orthodontist who lives 4 doors down from me just said he doesn't like the looks of me doing what I'm doing, and he put a gun in my face, and now I'm in prison. And you're just like, bro, the orthodontists? Like, that's literally what's going on here.
Not even in your own county. They filled the prisons or the jails so much they had to start sending minors to the neighboring county for detention.
Whoa. This is wild.
The strikers responded by dynamiting the head house of the War Eagle Coal Company and burning down the Stone Mountain Coal Company.
Yeah, okay, all right, cool.
The Lynn Coal Company's store near Madeline was looted and then burned down.
Sick, yes.
On May 25th, Kentucky militiamen and West Virginia State Police ran headlong at night into strikers. A battle ensued, and one West Virginia State policeman and one Kentucky militiaman were killed, along with one striker.
Wow.
In July, after a raid on a tent colony, the Madeline County jail was so overfilled that prisoners were held on the courthouse lawn. On June 3rd, Brockus of the state police raided the colony at Lick Creek and arrested every man they could find. On July 13th, Davis himself sprayed machine gun bullets into the same tent colony and then moved throughout the tents in order to take anyone they found dead or alive. One man, Alex Breedlove, was shot while surrendering to the militia. Meanwhile, the Union leadership, till that point, they'd been operating out of a hotel in Williamson, the county seat. They were raided and 4 members were arrested and taken to jail in McDowell County. John Lewis protested to the governor, and Philip Murray, vice president of the Union, rushed to the state on behalf of the 4 arrested organizers. The organizers were released only on the condition that they leave West Virginia immediately.
They were exiled?
Yeah.
That is so wild. Okay.
So Sid's role as constable, because remember, he's constable, so he's kind of running the jails a little bit, was pretty minimal. Newspaper reporters rushed to get photos of him posing with guns, which he liked to do a lot. But he tried his best to avoid following the martial law edict. When one prisoner was brought to his jail to be imprisoned, for example, Sid said that he'd misplaced the key. When the new town mayor demanded that Sid give up the key, he responded, "Search me." A few days later, state police confiscated 10,000 rounds of ammunition that Sid had specifically ordered to sell at his store to Union miners.
Wow.
So he's taking a side. At this point, stories of the unrest in southern counties of West Virginia became really national news. California Senator Hiram Johnson called for an investigation into Alex Breedlove's death. Photos of the miners' families standing beside their bullet-ridden tents became front-page news across the country.
Wow.
And Sid was called to testify at a congressional hearing on the violence in West Virginia. Immediately, the criminal indictment still standing against him was mentioned by Senator Kenyon of Iowa, chairman of the Senate Committee on Education and Labor. When pressed on the events leading to his confrontation with Baldwin Felts, Sid claimed simply Al Felts shot the mayor and then the shooting started in general. Sid's version of the events was basically thus: members of a private police force hired by the mine operators had conspired to arrest him. the police chief of Matawan, and remove him to their headquarters in Bluefield, 100 miles away. Even a senator looking at the warrant, remember the bogus warrant, said it was void on its face. Charles Lively, the spy, also testified, explaining that he was and always had been a labor spy, having gone to work for the Baldwin Fells Agency a decade prior to his arrival in Matawan. In fact, he had participated as a labor spy in Colorado during the Ludlow massacre and acted as the vice president of the local union in Colorado.
Whoa. That's scary.
So, Senator McKellar of Tennessee declared in astonishment, "Do you mean to say that you were vice president of the local lodge of the union while you were acting in the employ of the detective agency?" While this was going on, Sid received word that he had been indicted for his participation in the failed union raid in Mohawk in McDowell County a year earlier. And guess who had pointed the finger at him?
Who?
Charles fucking Lively.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Charles Lively. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he told his union lawyer, Sam Montgomery, that he feared that he would be killed if he returned to McDowell. 2 weeks later, Harry Chafin, by the way, related to Don Chafin of Logan County, and William Hatfield arrested Sid and took him to the Welsh County Courthouse in McDowell. Jessie posted his bail using the store she'd inherited from her dead husband, Mayor Testerman, as collateral for the bail, and he returned to Matawan to await his arraignment. District 17 President Kinney asked for special protection on his behalf, but was refused.
Wow.
Sam Montgomery told a reporter, if Sid submitted himself to be taken into McDowell County, he would be killed. On August 1st, Sid and Ed Chambers, along with their wives, Jessie and Sally, as well as Jim Kirkpatrick, a Mingo County sheriff and friend of the families, arrived in Welsh and appeared at the courthouse steps unarmed. Apparently, earlier at the hotel, Kirkpatrick had been like, "That's a real nice gun you have there," to Sid, and Sid was like, "Yep, and I'm leaving it behind because I don't want to be searched at the courthouse." As they reached the courthouse, several members of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, led by Charles Lively, emerged and shot down both Sid and Ed.
Wow.
As mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Lively himself walked up to Ed Chambers while Sally tried to protect her husband and shot Ed in the temple, finally killing him. Also, he apparently took the umbrella out of Sally's hands and threw it away, just as added insult to injury here. As an addendum, the next year, the Baldwin Felts detectives claiming self-defense were acquitted by a jury. So they actually were charged, but they were acquitted after deliberating for less than an hour.
Oh,
Lively
my God.
eventually ended up working as sheriff and prohibition officer in Colorado, where eventually he was arrested for pistol whipping a man. Later, he was arrested for assaulting a grand jury witness against him. At the end of his life, he operated a hotel with his second wife and died in 1962. Oh, funny story about his second wife. So he was actually charged with bigamy at one point because he had failed to divorce his first wife to marry his second wife, who was 20 years younger than him.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
What a man. What a guy. What a guy. Also, it's like 1962, when you think about the civil rights movements and you think about who were the cops of the civil rights movements during that time, you know, it's guys like this. These are the guys, you know,
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah.
Sid Hatfield and Ed Chambers' funeral was attended by more than 2,000 people, miners and their families mostly. Sam Montgomery, the lawyer, in his eulogy told mourners, "There can be no peace in West Virginia until the enforcement of the law is removed from the hands of private detective agencies and from those deputy sheriffs who are paid not by the state, but by the great corporations who have no interest in West Virginia's tomorrow."
Yeah.
People were pissed, right? Like the thing, like at this point, the miners were just like, they shot down Sid like dogs while their wives watched. Martial law was still in effect, and while all the Baldwin Fields agents were free, hundreds of miners were still in jail. So that's what's going on in August. In Charleston, mass meetings were called and resolutions made for an investigation. Lively told reporters he'd shot in self-defense an unarmed man.
Yeah.
Governor Morgan, then pretty thoroughly discredited among the union, called for an investigation. Mother Jones, meanwhile, struck a surprisingly conciliatory tone, telling miners to disperse. The miners didn't listen. And I think we'll get into Mother Jones in a little bit.
It's interesting. I mean, my theory is that she didn't want anybody else to get killed.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, shit, this is going really bad. Like, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll save it. Okay.
We'll save it. It's gonna, like, she does weird shit.
Okay.
On August 7th, miners along the Little Coal River, halfway between Charleston and Matawan, began arming themselves. Neighboring Logan County Sheriff Don Chafin, in the employ of the coal mining companies, like he was bought and paid for by the coal mining companies, requested aid from the state police. On August 12th, state police paraded on horseback near the town of Clothier. A horse threw one of the police from its back into the dirt.
Fuck yeah.
In embarrassment, horse is pro-union.
Yeah.
At the same time, so in embarrassment, the police arrested and beat up one of the onlooking miners.
What?
At the same time,
God, they're so pathetic.
Penny and Mooney, the president and secretary of District 17, presented Morgan with a list of demands for negotiations with the mining companies, including an end to martial law. Morgan rejected the demands, and striking miners began a march on Mingo County, which would take them through Logan, and Blair Mountain is in Logan County. Miners, first mistaking one train for carrying the state militia, shot at it, and the engineer later counted like dozens of bullet holes in the side of his train engine. So another train passing the Lynn's Creek camp, actually carrying the state militia, was stopped. The militia was disarmed and dispersed into the woods. On August 24th, 200 miners gathered at Lynn's Creek, armed, and began marching towards Mingo and Logan counties over the mountain ridge. Don Chafin declared that no armed mob will cross Logan County. In response, the miners said, we will hang Don Chafin to a sour apple tree to the tune of John Brown's body.
Wow.
2 miners along the Kanawha River told a gathered crowd of miners, that 2 black miners specifically, told miners along the Kanawha River that if they didn't join the march, they'd have a yellow streak down their backs. And this is something else that's worth mentioning. Black miners took part in this strike in huge numbers, and we'll talk about one a little later. But the other thing, in a coal mining context, they all took up a uniform of blue overalls and a red handkerchief. So the pre-existing term redneck came to mean, in the coal mining context, these union miners agitating. And later, Don Chafin said in like an interview with a reporter years after the fact, something about, we shot down one of them Bolsheviks. So this was a part of a Red Scare, because remember, the Russian Revolution had happened a few years prior.
Right.
And so there was this huge Red Scare happening at the time. In several instances, miners who refused to join the march were shot and their bodies were deposited at the county coroner's office.
Whoa.
The miners increasingly, they were getting radical.
Yeah.
The next morning, Mother Jones appeared at the Lynn's Creek camp. She said she had met with the governor and, on his urging, gone to the miners' camp to urge restraint. She pretended to read a telegram from President Harding. I request that you abandon your purpose and return to your homes, and I assure you that my good offices will be used to forever eliminate the gunman system from the state of West Virginia. Bill Blizzard, one of the organizers who had taken on a leadership role on the growing mass of miners, which at this point was numbering in the thousands, declared the letter a fake and exhorted the faltering men, What in the hell is wrong with you? Do you want some old woman to take you by the hand and lead you across the hill? Straighten up and be men. At this point, however, the telegram, which did in fact turn out to be fake, actually Mooney and Kinney like sent a telegram to President Harding, and President Harding was like, I don't know what this like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. So it was a fake. It was of little use, though. The miners were already marching towards Don Chafin, towards Blair Mountain, where Don Chafin, really eager for a fight, had amassed a private army of 2,000 paid for by the Logan County coal operators, comprised of middle classes of Logan County, and which lay directly in the path of the Linz Creek mining camp on their marches in Mingo. Moreover, Chafin's deputies rushed through non-union mining camps shouting, anyone who doesn't fight is fired. On August 25th, after skirmishes occurred near Blair Mountain and Harding threatened to send in the federal troops, miners near Madison and nearby Boone County met in a baseball park. After the meeting with General Thomas, in which Thomas laid out that if the miners didn't disperse, the United States military would be called in, organizers Kenny and Mooney agreed to disperse the march, and most of the miners basically just hung out in Boone waiting for trains to take them back. At that point, rumors began to spread with evidence that Chafin's private army had opened fire on Union sympathizers and Sharples and then dispersed the miners. Estimates range from 5,000 to 10,000 turned back towards Blair Mountain, because basically what had happened is Chafin's army had opened fire on these sympathizers and Sharples, and rumors began to spread that included like women and children, and the miners got like pissed and basically stormed Blair Mountain.
Also, worth noting, again, this army, big air quotes around army, this is just like a bunch of middle class dudes who don't like the poor is getting so uppity.
But they had some weapons also. They had machine guns, cannons, and planes, and were dropping bombs and poison gas on the miners. Right?
So wild. Just some middle class people that were deputized, basically, to go fight on behalf of capital. Yeah. And all of those weapons were paid for by the coal companies.
Yep.
Wow.
By August 30th, the National Guard had been called out, and by September 2nd, federal troops had arrived. On August 31st, the fighting reached its height. Some 10,000 miners, angered over the deaths of Sid and Ed and the excesses of Don Chafin's private army, descended on Blair Mountain, where Chafin's men were entrenched. In addition to the bombs and poison gas, Chafin's private army dropped leaflets carrying the words of President Harding. Harding had ordered the National Air Service to drop bombs on the miners as well.
Wow.
Bill Blizzard, himself a veteran, was unwilling to engage in open warfare with the federal government. And finally, the miners dispersed. In the preceding struggles, between 50 and 100 miners were killed, along with about 30 of Chafin's 2,000-member militia. As with most important things in U.S. labor history, the Battle of Blair Mountain is largely a tragedy. The immediate aftermath was a rout for the United Mine Workers organizing attempts in West Virginia. There are a few things to be noted. Though not perfect, the battle was one of the rare occasions when Black and white workers largely stood together. Red Thompson, one of the Black organizers, led a group of 75 men in an assault on Blair Mountain and apparently captured 10 of Don Chafin's men along the way.
Wow.
It remains one of the largest single labor battles in U.S. history and one of the most naked examples of class warfare. So, Maddie, thoughts, discussion.
Okay, so my initial thoughts are, one, I can't believe I didn't know about all of this, right? And I assume that's on purpose. This isn't stuff that you want people knowing, because there's two reasons. First of all, the lengths that capital will go to protect its own interests. Like, oh no, they will hire middle class people to be a private militia and give them apparently planes and poisoned gas to kill you if you threaten their profits. And it's, again, one of those stark reminders of just like how intrinsically linked the federal government and business are. They're there to support each other, and workers are just in the way. There's a softness to the current American left, not just American left, to the left in general. There's a real sensitivity for like the well-being of other people and like the lives of other people and their safety. And frankly, I think that this is making me realize that labor movements today would never have that much gumption or that much tooth, because people would be so concerned about the well-being of each other, right? That they wouldn't encourage people to strike. I don't think anybody today would encourage people to be in a situation where they would lose their homes, where their children would be forced out of their homes at gunpoint, where they could be literally shot and killed by their police force. You know, like there's a softness to it there. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, right, for us to be concerned about each other and to want people to be housed and to be alive. But it does kind of raise the question, like how far are people willing to go? Like, where does the fight start if fighting is intrinsically harmful, right? It's harmful. And I wonder if maybe the reason why we don't have labor movements like that today is that people are pursuing an option that they feel does the least amount of harm, but they're making, people are making we're all making, not just they, like me too, like we're all making short-term decisions over long-term decisions. We're like, well, in the short term, somebody losing their house or somebody getting shot by the police is terrible, and I wouldn't want to inflict that upon anybody. But in the long term, these types of labor movements have led to long-term positive change.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when I look at it, what I see are three things. One of which is that, like, coal miners are still used as, like, a symbol of American labor by, like, fucking dumbass politicians who don't give a shit about coal workers.
Right.
Right? Like, you know, and it's, like, across the political spectrum from Biden to Trump or whoever, right? At the same time that even in 1920, coal companies were overinvested in coal mines because coal was losing share to other forms of energy production. And that still happens today. In the meantime, so that's like coal miners. In the meantime, in response to sort of like the left in general, I think that, like, as I said earlier, I can't remember on the Patreon or here, the American labor movement has become so disaggregated because of laws like Smith-Connolly or Taft-Hartley, and because of the subsequent rise of Taylorist production methods, the outsourcing of labor, which has changed the American economy in really fundamental ways that make it harder to see yourself as a member of a productive labor force. So you see yourself as like an office worker or a Starbucks worker, but you don't see yourself as a member of a class. And I think that's why labor and the bourgeoisie at the same time, because, like, right, the bourgeoisie was like, fuck it, we're going to get guns and shoot these proletariat people. Like, it was very open class warfare in a way that everything is sort of dispersed now. Right.
Yeah, it's like the workers are still dying, but they're dying because they're rationing their insulin. Or the workers are still dying, but they're dying because there's no investment in public infrastructure, and our roads are some of the most dangerous in the wealthy world because we prioritize car culture above public transportation in a way that literally, like, kills people while they're driving to work every day. So it's like violence is still happening. It's just happening in slow motion now, maybe.
And in this, like, kind of ambient way, right? We understand that violence, you know, like, violence against theft is class-based violence, like, right? But it doesn't seem like it the way a Baldwin's Felts detective just, like, straight up shooting the mayor of a town seemed like it.
Right. It is interesting. And it's maybe that, you know, maybe it's that the power structures have become like that Kissinger doctrine, right? Where they try to not make as many waves now, but like the violence becomes institutionalized so that it's commonplace. And then now the violence is the status quo and nothing sensational ever happens, but it's violent nonetheless.
But it breaks out, right? Like the Watts Rebellion in Los Angeles was class-based violence. It was also race-based, but those two things are the same thing.
Right.
Right. The Rodney King and stuff. Like I go to LA moments because those are the moments that I know the most about, but these things happen frequently.
No, it's true. Even Melrose, even there was the riots, like 2 or 3 years ago on Melrose. And that was amazing, obviously, to watch happen. And you're right. There becomes these moments where somebody does go too far and the violence becomes sensationalized rather than the sterile institutional violence we're used to. And it's met in kind. So it's almost like the power structure has benefited so much from that sterile institutionalized form of violence that they actually know it's not advantageous to do anything outside of that status quo because it will be met in kind. And maybe as a result of that, maybe as a result of the violence becoming that kind of stagnant, kind of almost dull drudgery type of violence, our forms of quote unquote rebellion are kind of that dull and stagnant as well, because we're responding to each other in this way, the different systems of power and powerlessness. I think everybody always is trying to answer the question, like, what's wrong with the American left? And I don't know. At first, when we first started talking, I was like, I think we care so much about people and want people to be well that the violent steps that might be necessary for a revolution or to fight back against your bosses or to stand up for better rights, we don't have that in us because we know how directly harmful it would be to people. And we care about people. We don't want people to go through suffering. But I think maybe it's not that, because people are suffering either way. So I think maybe it is just that we're matching kind. We're matching the energy, right? And the energy of the power structure it's a slow, long, dull fight. And so maybe that's the reaction. It's like, okay, then we're doing a slow, long, dull fight.
And I mean, the thing is, like, your private bug or like your very public bugbear has always been like state intervention and COINTELPRO type of stuff.
Yeah.
And watching the American left over the course, not just of the 20th century, but over the course of the 20th century, just get destroyed in one fight after another, in which at every instance, whenever you read about the American left, especially in like the post-war era, like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they're so naive. Like they think that they're fighting on equal terms with the state, and then the state is doing the dirtiest shit to discredit the left. And you see that with like a lot of contemporary unions that are extraordinarily conservative and how they deal with capital, following the kind of Gompers model.
Right.
And so I think I think there's no sort of like self-consciousness of oneself as a member of a class. And at least for me, left politics always, I'm a Marxist, so left politics always has to be class politics and always has to be about who controls production, who controls the means of production.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've lost sight of that. Like as like a as like a kind of disaggregated mob of like isolated, atomized workers in cubicles or now working remotely over Zoom or whatever. We've lost sight of ourselves as members of a class.
Yeah, I think that's true. I can agree with that. I think that, we conceptualize of ourselves as individuals, right? Operating in a hyper individualistic society. And we talked about this in the bonus episode a little bit, but it's like the solutions offered to us aren't community based, aren't class based. The solutions offered to us are self-help. Everything's about the self.
Yeah.
It's we have this obsession with things like personality tests and astrology, like anything that tells us more about ourselves. And it's this very like introverted, self-obsessed way of interacting with the world. We want to know everything about us. We want to be able to tell other people everything about us. And I think there can be something earnest about it, the desire to understand and be understood by people. I think that's really important. But it does happen on this hyper individualistic level that I think we have become a little self-obsessed, a little maybe, and maybe that interferes with our ability to think of ourselves as part of a whole, as part of a movement.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, a friend of mine from who lives in, I think, New York now, but lived in Chicago when I knew him, who was an organizer, once said at some point to me, he was like, I mean, a lot of times conceptualizing yourself as a class means that you might not like all of the people on the same side as you. They don't have to be your buds to be people worth fighting for. And I think
no, I think that's really true and really important. And I've told people this before about what we always say at work about our coworkers is, because we have interpersonal issues at work sometimes, and it's a small business and there's not HR. It's what I always tell people is you don't have to love each other. You just have to not kill each other long enough to get a paycheck.
Yeah. And I think for organizing, for activism, the idea that we talked about this when we were doing the episode on sort of consumerism and subcultures and all of that stuff. The idea that your politics are going to be life politics, that it's about these sort of consumer identifications with certain things, that you are sort of aesthetically and politically related to environmentalism, for example, or to the left or whatever, is bullshit. It's bullshit. Do real politics.
Right.
Do things intervene in the things that are killing us.
Right. You can't, the primary way you identify yourself can't be as a consumer, because if that happens, you're just reducing your identity to one based on consumption. And that doesn't help anybody. All that does is reinforce that your primary mode of operating in the world is to purchase things and uphold the interests of business and capital. And I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of us to wrap our heads around, how destructive that can be to first and foremost conceptualize of ourselves as one, individuals, and two, consumers, in tandem. Because the two are linked, because there is a business around hyper individuality that we're bought and sold all the time. Okay, well, I thought this was a really good and interesting episode. I liked it.
All right.
And I think that's going to be it. So if you want to hear more about Samuel Gompers, who we talked about, head on over to the Patreon. And I don't know, do you have anything else you want to add, David?
I'm standing outside to get internet access, so I'm cold.
Okay, that's it. We're done. Release David from the chill.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. If you would like to join us on Patreon, you can find us there at patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. For $3 a month, you can access bonus content there. But if $3 a month is too much for you to spend right now, we totally get it, and we're just happy you're here. As always, you can find the sources for this week's episode just by scrolling down a bit in the description.